basically had to take out a loan, was the only way in order to attend college?
I would not have been able to do it without the student loans. I had no other choice but to take out the student loans.
I'm Linda Hirsch.
I'm Jim Carney, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education.
Too many students are graduating college with massive amounts of student debt. They often cannot find jobs in their fields, making it difficult, if not impossible, to pay back these loans. Is there a way out for students saddled with student loan debt? Today, financial expert Reyna Gobel joins me to advise students on ways of managing their debt while still being able to live lives that are financially secure. We'll discuss coping with both public and private loans and changes in legislation that may affect borrowers.
Later on in the program, I'll continue my conversation with some students that are dealing with debt now and past debt. But first, we begin with Linda and her guest in the studio.
My guest today is Reyna Gobel, student loan expert and the author of Graduation Debt: How to Manage Student Loans and Live Your Life. Thank you for joining us on EdCast.
Thank you for having me.
How serious is the student loan situation?
Well, I think there's two parts to the student loan situation. There's the actual debt load, and then there's the financial education and really knowing about the programs that are available. For instance, 25% of individuals who have loans qualify for public service loan forgiveness, where they could get some forgiven. Do they know about it? Are they taking advantage of it? Many are not. So there's a crisis of financial education more than the actual debt, especially with federal loans, which have so many repayment plans and options for taking breaks from payments that there really is no reason to not pay your student loans or at least have an excused payment break.
And some students are carrying big amounts of debt or not so big?
It can be that they're carrying a few thousand, or it could be that they're carrying 200,000-300,000, depending on how much education they have and what school they chose.
Now, we have people watching whose kids are going off to college. They probably filled out financial aid applications. What are some things that people can do to not have to accumulate so much debt in the first place?
Sure, and it all goes back to being a good consumer. And that starts off with filling out the FAFSA form, because it's not just the fast track to student loans, it also puts you in line for scholarships that are available and grants and university grants. And you don't have to be at a certain income level to qualify. For instance, I plugged in numbers for Harvard for a family making $200,000 combined, and they qualified for some level of need-based aid. So it depends school to school. So I suggest first you fill out the FAFSA so that you at least have a chance of getting scholarships. You talk to the high school guidance counselors, who are so much better than when I was young. They used to be football coaches, and now if they're the football coach, they also have a master's in counseling and can really help you find scholarships in your area that you may qualify for. I also suggest that you contact the school financial aid offices, especially after you've applied to several, both private and public, because sometimes private schools can have a high sticker price, the high price that you read in the book, but really, by the time you get to the scholarships and the grants and all the things they're going to offer you, sometimes they're cheaper than public schools.
So look to the high school counselors, the people on your high school campus, and then contact the college that you want to go to. Now, there's been some talk, I certainly hear this all the time, about selecting a career based on the amount of debt you might accumulate in the future and your ability to pay off debt or have money. Do you advise that people select a career with financial payment in mind?
I actually advise the opposite.
Okay.
I believe that you find a career field where you're happy, and then you think about the debt load, and because most of us will probably change career fields in their lifetime, I certainly didn't think I was going to be writing about finances, but here I am, and I'm a national expert in it.
What was your major?
My original major that I changed from was environmental studies. I wanted to be an environmental lawyer at first. So the amount of debt I would have accumulated for that is different than what I would for what I'm doing now. So you want to just accumulate the lowest amount of debt you can, but never just say, oh, I don't want any student loans, because then you may be inhibiting yourself from pursuing the career you love. I have $60,000 in debt. It's a $300 payment. It's just a payment among like an electric bill and a phone bill or a cable bill. It's fine. I can handle it. but I also have 2 master's degrees to get to that $60,000. But I always thought about the debt. What's the payment I can afford when I get out? As long as you think about that, you're fine. And unless you're dead set on a really high-paying career, which those $150,000 people were, and then they got out of school and they're like, oh, wait a second, I want to be a public defender. If you keep a low amount of debt and you compare schools, then you'll be fine. You just got to make sure that you keep a reasonable amount of debt, no matter what your career aspirations are, because you want freedom in your life.
Now, you mentioned earlier on about federal loans and that they can be better. I think some people are confused about the difference between federal and private loans in terms of the obligations and even in terms of the payback options. So could you give us a little bit of a 101 on what's the difference between
Sure.
a federal and private loan?
I used to be dead set against private loans in general. If someone mentioned them, I would go down in my chair, I'd hunch over and I'd be like, what are you doing to
But federal
yourself?
doesn't give you that much money.
But it's changed.
Okay.
There's 2 things. First of all, federal gives you a specific amount. Parent loans are at least better than private loans most of the time.
I have a parent
Yeah,
loan.
you have parent loans.
I do.
We'll talk about that too.
Okay.
And because I think that there's a lot that parents need to know right now.
Okay.
But so you can get parent loans, and those have options that some of the regular student loans have, and they also have less options, but still better than private as far as if you get into financial trouble later on. But you can also minimize the amount of debt that you accrue, where going beyond the federal limits is not as important. Maybe living at home, or it may be working for the amount that room and board costs, because the federal loans will normally cover tuition at a state school. So you really have to think about that and think about where you're applying. Is the school worth it? Some of the most successful people in the world went to state schools, and I have an MBA. I can network with the people from Harvard at the same networking events, and I have a degree from the University of North Texas.
Now, what's the advantage of the federal loans? Why were you
payback.
dead? All right, so tell us about that. What's the difference?
Being able to put your payments on hold, guaranteed.
For any reason?
Well, generally for economic reasons, but there are some that are kind of wiggly that you can just say, I'm having a temporary issue right now, and it could be that you need to pay off your credit cards, and you can take a few months, whereas you can't do that with others. If you do end up where you lose your job or something, or choosing an income-based plan, or this 10-year public service loan forgiveness program, and public service is a huge thing. It could be a private school professor, or it could be a human resources person at a hospital. It's a lot more than people
Really?
think it is.
Oh.
And then when it comes to the private loans, sometimes they have lower interest rates and they have fixed rates now. They don't have any guarantee for if you get into economic trouble. It's a bank. And very important on those is that if you're a co-signer and you're a parent, think of it as you just bought an education car. You are as responsible. They can't repossess the education, but they sure can ding your credit. So it's really important that you think of it that way. Try to stick to the federal limits when possible. After that, borrow minimally with the parent loans, or plus loans for grad students instead of the parent loans.
Okay, these are very good points. Now, when do you have to start paying back the loan? The day that you graduate, or is there a certain period that they give you?
Now, private loans can be a little different,
Okay.
but federal loans, there is a 6-month grace period.
6 months, okay.
And what I recommend during that 6-month grace period, because I didn't know what my bills would be when I got out of school, especially if you're moving to a new city. So I suggest during that 6-month grace period, you use the repayment calculators, the estimator on the federal student loan website, to figure out what your approximate payments could be, and then save that payment in a savings account. Then you can choose a payment plan that will work for you when your 6 months are over. Just make sure you choose it before the 6 months are over, because I don't want you to end up with a ding on your credit because of a late payment.
And that's the federal. You have
Right.
to say, now what about the private loan? Do you get the same 6 months?
Remember, it's a bank loan, so it's up to the bank. You want to see what your contract says. And the reason why, because that fixed interest rate that private loans can be good sometimes, is if you're going back to grad school, you're already working in the field, you're borrowing $10,000, and you know you're going to repay it within 2 or 3 years. So the idea of if you get into financial trouble is not as big a deal to you, because you're already in your career field. And also because I'm looking out for the parents, if your parent does not have to co-sign because your credit is already established.
Now, what is the difference between the Parent Plus loan, which I have,
Yes.
and the private bank loan, which my son also has? Why do you say the parent loan is better? What's better about it?
I'm all about a safety net. And if you get into financial trouble where you can't afford the payments, you may be able to take a break, or you could qualify for a higher version of the income-based plan, the income contingent plan, which we never know, that may change where later parents will be able to qualify for more programs. But you have options of payment breaks if you need it. If you get sick, if something happens, there's guaranteed options. Private student loans generally do not have guaranteed options beyond what the bank chooses to offer you in the contract. Everything else is up to discretion of the lender.
Jim Carney had the opportunity to speak to some of our CUNY students about their experiences with student loans. So let's hear what they have to say.
Did you have to take out student loans to help pay for your education?
I had to take out student loans to pay the remainder because I did receive financial aid. It's just that there would be like a remaining balance, and we didn't really exactly have money like conveniently to just pay the rest. So usually I just took a student loan to cap off the rest.
What type of loans did you find it necessary to take out to help pay for your education? And how did you find out about student loans, and where did you eventually get them from?
Well, I took actually federal student loans, both direct, both unsubsidized and subsidized. Actually, my mom had taken student loans out, and she had suggested it to me, mainly because not only to cover the rest of the financial aid, but also she would tell me that because since I don't exactly have a job at the moment, that to have extra funds to pay for other expenses like books and traveling expenses and stuff like that.
To get myself through college, I had to take out some loans. I have two loans. One is an unsubsidized loan and a subsidized loan. One accrues interest and one doesn't. I think the name of them were the Stratford loans. I'm not pretty sure.
Okay.
And the total amount is $19,000.
Okay. Would you have been able to go to college without going into debt?
No, because when I first started going to school, I was working and I was not qualified for financial aid. I didn't qualify for financial aid until my last semester in Lehman College. Therefore, my associates and my complete bachelor's I got through student loans. That's the reason why I owe so much money now.
Have the student loans made the difference, or are they just a part of the financial picture in paying for college?
Well, both, I would say. I would not have been able to do it without the student loans. I had no other choice but to take out the student loans. And I don't think financial aid would have ever covered me completely because I wasn't even qualified until my last semester. So student loans were my only choice. I couldn't afford it on my own either, so.
Did you have to go into debt with student loans in order to go to college?
Yes, unfortunately I did and still am. I basically had to take out a loan, was the only way in order to attend college.
Are you a graduate and paying off the loans?
I am a college graduate, and right now it's 2014. I graduated 4 years ago, and I still am paying off loans. So it's very frustrating, and at the same time, you have to plan everything out financially before. I mean, I'm in the middle of wanting to purchase a home or at least a complex, but I have to keep these loans in mind and paying monthly and just in the long run. So it has, and it still affects me to this day, and still having a pretty large balance to pay off.
Did you give a lot of thought to how you would have to pay off the loans and what it might mean for you after you graduate from college?
Oh, I mean, I put some thought to it, but my mother usually reminded me that I'm making an investment in myself. So if anything, that even though of course I'm gonna have to pay, probably by now I'm up to like over $10,000 in debt, but if I'm, I guess, successful in my career, and you know, that she told me especially that they're very manageable.
Have the student loans made the difference, or are they just a part of the financial picture in paying for college?
I would not have been able to do it without the student loans. I had no other choice but to take out the student loans. And I don't think financial aid would have ever covered me completely because I wasn't even qualified until my last semester. So student loans were my only choice. I couldn't afford it on my own either, so.
And you're working as well.
I am working, but not making enough money to pay not even close to half of what I owe. So I'm making monthly payments. That's what I'm doing right now.
Who have been able to get an education, secondary education, without student loans?
I wouldn't have been able to, no. I wouldn't have been able to attend college on a grand scale at that. But just having loans has enabled me to get to class and, getting an education, but at a cost, of course, just several, in the thousands here.
And now back to Linda and her guests in the studio.
So graduate school, should you take on more debt for graduate school? You mentioned that you have graduate school debt, that your debt went up. What do you say to people who say, already have some debt as an undergrad, now this master's degree is going to cost me more?
Well, it depends why you're getting the graduate degree. Are you doing it to avoid loan payment right now, or do you have a very specific purpose? Have you been doing shadow days while you're in school?
What is that?
A shadow day? That's where you spend 2 hours with a professional learning what they do, so you determine if that's a job you want.
Okay.
Do you know the specific jobs that you're going to get from graduate school? Do you know the career path? Because otherwise, you're just accumulating more debt for the sake of it. So you really have to be sure that you know why you're going back to graduate school. Then you can think about, well, what are my payments going to be? You can calculate those before you take on the payments. My other suggestion is, a lot of people think, oh, I should repay my undergraduate loans first.
Right.
Well, the undergraduate loans are going to be at a much lower interest rate. So really what you're better off doing is leaving those, if you can pay for graduate school, and then wait to pay off the undergraduate loans because they're at a lower interest rate, so you're better off.
Very interesting advice, thank you. Let's talk
Very
about
welcome.
loan consolidation, okay, and picking various payment plans. I mentioned to you before we started the show that I asked my son, who graduated about, 5-6 years ago, if he had consolidated his loans, and he said he didn't know. So what is this consolidation, and should we do it, and tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, generally what consolidation means is just that you're taking all your loans, your federal loans, and combining it into one loan.
Your federal loans,
Yes.
okay. Mm-hmm.
If you had some of your federal loans that were issued by banks, which they used to be, this is a good thing if you think you'll ever qualify for public service loan forgiveness, because you can't do that with non-direct loans. So this then it becomes a direct loan.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what public service loan forgiveness is and who would be eligible for it?
Yeah.
You said it covers a lot of things, but tell us a little bit.
I love talking about it.
Okay, what is it?
Anything to give people free money, right?
Okay.
So what public service loan forgiveness, it was a program that if you choose a position in public service that makes a lower income and you took on a lot of debt to do it, that some of it can be forgiven after 10 years of income-based repayment. What's really nice, and it can also be pay as you earn, but what's really nice about the program is that it also works if you're a doctor. In your first couple of years, you're not making as much, so you get some level of forgiveness that way. So it's really nice. You choose one of these plans after 10 years of on-time repayments, you can possibly get some of your loans forgiven. It's fantastic. But
So
you have
how do you find out what constitutes a public service position?
If you have any inkling that you might qualify, you fill out the application.
Okay.
And there's an employment certification form online. You can find it on my website, graduationdebt.org. I have a link to it. I love the application because so many people that think they don't qualify do. I mean, if it's a government contract and you're working on a government contract, there's a possibility that the job that you have may qualify. It doesn't have to be consecutive. You can take a break, and those years don't count. But when you start a public service job again, it will. But it's very important you consolidate with direct loans, because if you're not, you won't get it. You have to go by the rules that it says. But it's not just about consolidation. It's about that you're choosing one of these income-related plans. So make sure that you have the right plan, talk to the servicer, double-check everything, and everyone should go on the National Student Loan Data System site to make sure that all their loans are in repayment status. I had a default about 10 years ago, and it was because I forgot one loan, 16 undergraduate loans, and one fell through the cracks, and everything else was fine. I just forgot this loan, but it's partly why 20% of my generation had a default. New students, 15% are coming out with a default, and I think a large part of it is just forgetting one out of 10 plus loans exist.
What happens, and this question's come up, people say, ask our expert.
Sure.
What happens if you get laid off? Or you change your careers, or you take a cut in salary? Do you have options?
Yeah, I mean, the income-related plans are recalculated every year, so you submit.
And those are for federal?
Those are for federal.
Okay.
And what I suggest if you have federal and private and you have one of those situations is first see what your income-related payment is. It may be zero, and then that gives you more money to pay your private. And then, but always talk to your private too. And whatever you do, if your parents co-sign, do not just miss a payment. Talk to them first, because maybe they can help you with a payment or two, or they can pay part, you can pay part, but don't ding your parents' credit for no reason.
And be aware of it if you are a parent, that this could happen. It can be, about your even being aware of it. Now, should students pay off their loans early? Is that always a good thing to do?
Nope.
Okay, why not?
Because maybe with private, but with federal, because you have so many options for when you hit an economic slump, I'd rather see students put money aside in an emergency account first. I'm not in a rush to pay off my loans. I got mine, I was lucky. I consolidated at a little over 2%.
Well, that's low.
Yeah, but even so, like even if I had loans at 6%, I would still put money aside first, because it's just smarter. You want to be okay in case of an emergency. That's more important than interest rates or anything else. Throw 5, 10 extra bucks at it on a monthly basis if you want, but don't, and if you have income related and you qualify for public service loan forgiveness, don't ever try to pay off your student loans early, because then basically, in most cases, you're costing yourself money, because what you get forgiven is the remainder of the payment.
Terrific. Okay, great advice. Now, a lot of people are holding their breath, hoping that there's going to be some changes in legislation that are really going to help students with debt. What do you say? Where are we in that legislation, and what do you anticipate may happen, and what can we look forward to, if anything?
Okay. Well, the first thing I would say is I don't recommend anyone holding their breath too long. Turning blue only works if you're a Smurf, and it's not going to help you with your loans. And you're not going to, there's not going to be something that says, oh, student loans, poof, they're gone. They didn't really even do that with mortgages. It was
Would any of this be
rate.
retroactive? Are they talking about anything going retroactively if they put something in the legislation, or is it just be for moving forward?
Oh, there's some things that are kind of both. And if the pay-as-you-earn change, which would reduce payments for a lot of people, that starts December 2015. My worry was that is if people start waiting to make their payments until December 2015, you're going to end up in default. You're going to end up with some really awful credit for no reason. But even default can be recovered from with payments as low as $5, depending on your income. And after 9 payments within 10 months, you can actually get the thing removed from your credit report. So it's pretty fantastic.
You can get it removed?
Yep.
Okay.
I did.
And you're not anticipating that this legislation will make loans disappear. I mean, will make repayment disappear. Students will have to pay back in some form.
The only thing that makes loans disappear is either if you happen to be the very, very small percentage that can declare bankruptcy, and that has to be that you just have no ability to work almost for the rest of your life, or paying it back.
You raised but we only have a minute or two left. I want to get to couple of things that you mentioned in the book I thought were really interesting, and that is how student debt looks to lenders, and if people are listening and they're thinking, wow, I have student debt, can I ever get credit for anything else? What do you say to that?
Well, here's the main thing I say to that is that the biggest problem with student loans is not the amount of debt. Most of the time it's your budget and letting go of the guilt for taking on this debt in your relationship or in your life. You got this loan, but it's okay. What's important is how you pay it off. What lenders will look at more than anything for your mortgage is what your monthly payment is. So you can consolidate and choose a lower monthly payment. You can choose the 30-year plan so that it makes it okay with the mortgage, or you always look at the income-based public service. I can't emphasize that enough. Make sure you're on an income-related plan if you qualify for public service. But let go of the guilt, talk about it, talk to your servicer, look on the student loan data system, make sure you haven't missed a loan, and talk to your parents if you have a co-signed loan, and just really look at it as a total picture. As long as you do that, you'll just be just fine with everything in life.
And so you could get credit. It wouldn't mean that no one will ever give you money again.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you're paying it. I mean, but if you don't make your payments on anything, people will look at your credit and go, why would I want
Right.
to lend money to
So
someone
just
who doesn't?
pay back.
Pay it back.
We're out of time. I want to thank you so much. I want to say on a personal note that I really enjoyed reading your book because it's really accessible, and I am the kind of person whose eyes might glaze over sometimes, so I do want to tell people that it really is a very reader-friendly, user-friendly book. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. I think you gave us a tremendous amount of information. So thank you again, Reyna Gobel, the author of Graduation Debt, How to Manage Student Loans and Live Your Life. Thank you so much. You've been very helpful.
Thank you so much.
Don't go away. We'll be right back with our Ed Bites. Welcome back to this edition of Ed Bites.
Hoping to narrow the literacy gap between children from low-income and more affluent families, the American Academy of Pediatrics is encouraging parents to read, talk, and sing to their babies. The doctors point to research that indicates children from more affluent families are more likely to be read to and to have more language-rich interactions with adults. This results in greater literacy preparation when children start school. The Academy is also partnering with organizations to provide free books to low-income parents.
Should we be surprised that a new study from Harvard University says our children value achievement and personal happiness above caring for others? According to the study reported in Atlantic Online, the messages we mean to send may not be the actual ones we transmit. While 96% of parents say they want to raise ethical, caring children, 80% of the surveyed students said their parents were more concerned about achievement or their happiness than caring for others. There is an obvious disconnect between what we tell our children they should value and the messages we send through our behavior.
Earlier claims that texting may lead to deteriorating student writing skills may be unfounded. Research now reveals that texting improves children's spelling and grammar. This may be because the abbreviations and shortened words used in texting encourage children to sound out words and think phonetically about language.
This research actually gives some credibility to the old invented spelling that was maligned a decade ago as really undermining spelling, and it worked on the same principle of sounding out the word. Hope you're still paying attention. But if not, we're okay with that. New research says that boredom can be a powerful asset. According to Smart Brief on Leadership, a boring task, such as copying out telephone book entries, can make people more creative at subsequent problem solving. So instead of trying to eliminate boredom at work, psychologists say maybe we should embrace it. Are you still with me, Jim?
Sorry, I was a little bored, so I figured I'd improve on my spelling. Well, that does it for this edition of EdCast.
Until next time, class dismissed.
LOL.